If you have questions about science, whatever they might be, we go out and investigate the answers for you. This is your podcast. From the BBC World Service, welcome to Crowdscience. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Oh, hello. You are listening to Crowdscience on the BBC World Service. This week, coming to you rather embarrassingly from my bathroom. Oh, I should say, I'm Anand Jagatia. I'm just shaving, actually. I'm running a little bit late. Sorry about that. It's the funniest thing. I set my alarm last night, but it just didn't seem to go off in the morning, which is weird. I guess just unlucky. Anyway, I'm really excited about the show because this week's programme is all about superstitious beliefs. No. I can't believe that's just happened. I've just smashed my shaving mirror. And people say that's, 7 years bad luck? Luckily, I don't believe in bad luck, so that's fine. But what are the chances of that happening on a programme about superstition? Actually, now I come to think of it, what's even weirder is that producer Mel just happens to be here with her recording equipment to watch me shave and record everything that's happening. Spooky. It's pretty weird. Anyway, Mel, I suppose we better clean this mess up and then get on with the rest of the show. Come on then.
Like to believe that luck is around the corner.
I believe more in fate than luck.
I don't want to get bad luck.
Magpies, I'd salute them.
Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Yes, I believe in luck.
If you're walking down the street and the black cat crosses your path, you know you're going to have bad luck. Smash the mirror, it's 7 years bad luck.
Because I don't believe in superstition.
Depending on whereabouts you live and how superstitious you are, smashing a mirror might be the unluckiest thing you could do or something you wouldn't think twice about. Superstitions, which are normally to do with creating good luck or preventing bad luck, are found across all cultures. For example, in Russia, someone with an empty bucket is considered a particularly bad omen. And in many countries, including Brazil, Mexico and Afghanistan, touching someone's feet with a broom is said to bring misfortune. Now, you might be wondering why we're tackling this subject on Crowdscience, when the supernatural is, by definition, that which we can't explain with science or rational thought. But given that these beliefs are so pervasive across cultures, can science tell us anything about why we have them or where they come from? What do superstitions tell us about ourselves? And is there really such a thing as bad luck? The reason why we're talking fate, fortune and superstition this week is because of a question from listener Marcel, asking about a concept that's found in many societies around the world, the evil eye.
My name is Marcel Kane and I live in Boston, but I was originally born in Albania. So my question for Crowdscience is, what is evil eye? And is it something true? Is it real? Or is it something that people have kind of made up as they've observed things? Or is there some science behind it? I think evil eye is when someone, for example, looks at something nice that you have and maybe they say something good about it, and then the next day that thing that somebody was looking at, something bad happens to it. For example, let's say some simple things like you buy a car, okay, and it's beautiful and it's what you wanted, and then the next thing you know, the next day somebody scratches it or you get a nail in the tire or something like that, and it's just, I want to say it's coincidence, but at the same time, I feel like it just happens all the time. It seems like it. It's just weird, but I can't figure out an explanation for it.
Well, Marcel, thank you for your question. We are going to see if we can shed any light on the evil eye and superstitions in general, as it wasn't just Marcel who was interested in this topic. We've had listeners from Nigeria, Cameroon, Uganda and Ireland asking Crowdscience about juju, luck and fate, and whether they can influence our lives. Now, I don't think of myself as particularly superstitious, but when producer Mel approached me with this week's question about the evil eye, it reminded me of something from my childhood. To find out more, we're going to have to speak to an expert on that subject, my mum.
Hello?
Hi, Mum.
Hi.
Hi, it's your son.
Hello.
Calling from the BBC.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Cool. Have you just got home from work?
Yeah, I just got back from work.
So we're making this programme about, like, superstition and luck. I was trying to remember about stuff from when we were younger.
Okay.
And I remember that before we went to, like, a big, like, family, like, function, sometimes, like, people would give me sort of these little beans that were, like, wrapped in cloth to put in our pocket. And I'd say, like, why? And you'd say, oh, it's just to protect you from the evil eye.
Yes.
What was going on there?
Lots of parents protect their children from the evil eye in so many different ways. And the beads that you were talking about, it's a seed from a plant. I don't really know what that signifies. I think my sort of understanding about that is that people around you, you don't know what their intentions are. You don't know how they're actually going to be looking at you. So if you're really good-looking, handsome, somebody looks at you and they think, wow, look at that, he's gorgeous or whatever. But when they say that, do they really mean that with good intent?
Right, so they might be wishing something bad on you.
Yeah, it might be that it could be jealous, could be hatred, that we believe that, somebody can cast an evil eye on you. Like I remember when I got married, I had to tie this little lemon or little lime. Yeah, put it inside my skirt to protect me from the evil eye. And that's because on your wedding day, you would have dressed up and you'd be really pretty and, so we don't want somebody to look at you in sort of like a bad way.
Well, I've seen wedding pictures of you, Mum, and I can confirm to our listeners that you did look very beautiful, so it's probably a good idea. So what kinds of things are you protecting them from? Could it be anything, or is it just like...
It could be illnesses or anything like wrong happening to them. Same thing as if you have possessions of things that are valuable, you shouldn't make that public too much.
That's really interesting. Thanks for explaining all that. I've often wondered about that, and... yeah, thanks for protecting me. All right, bye, Mum.
Bye. Bye.
Superstitions, like the evil eye, have been found across humanity for thousands of years. But of course we have our modern equivalents too. In many Western cultures, the number 13 is considered unlucky, and so hotel floors and aeroplanes don't have floors or seats with those numbers on. Although, of course, they still technically have a 13th floor or a 13th row of seats. But in Italy, the number 17 is unlucky, while in Cantonese it's the number 4, which sounds like the word for death. In day-to-day, lots of us have little rituals that make us feel less anxious, items that might bring us good luck, or things we'd rather avoid doing, just in case we tempt fate. These kinds of superstitions, beliefs and thought processes are part of something known as magical thinking. And as we'll find out in this programme, nearly all of us, even the most rational and scientifically minded, think magically from time to time. Luckily for us, or perhaps just coincidentally, there's an exhibition on right now in the UK at Oxford's Ashmolean Museum. It's about magic, ritual and witchcraft through the ages, and it's called Spellbound. Curator and magical historian, very cool job title, Sophie Page, has met us at the entrance, which is fair to say is slightly unusual. Just as soon as we walked in, there's a ladder, and so you can get into the rest of the exhibit by walking under the ladder or skirting around it. I should point out here that walking under ladders is another thing that's supposed to bring bad luck in the UK and lots of other countries.
Next to the ladder is the question, do you worry about tempting fate? So that if you assertively feel, no, you don't worry, you can walk under. Quite a few people walk through, but most walk around.
Most walk around. So what would you do? Would you walk underneath or...?
I've done both, depending on the situation. I can walk under it now. We could all walk under it now.
You're exploring this idea of magical thinking throughout this exhibition. So what do we mean by magical thinking?
Basically, in its simplest sense, it's when you think or feel or believe that your actions will have an impact on the physical world that they can't actually have according to the laws of cause and effect. Which sounds a bit complicated, but we illustrate it with these questions. And if you answer yes to any of these questions, then you're thinking magically.
Right, so there's a display case here with some beautiful-looking objects and some questions.
So the first question is, do you have a lucky charm? And we have objects with these questions that relate to objects and ideas throughout the exhibition. So in this case, we have a coral, St. Michael trampling on the devil. Coral was thought to be particularly protective for children, so we have a rattle over there, an amulet, a piece of narwhal horn.
Oh, wow, so it must have been very expensive.
Yes, was often thought to be a unicorn horn. They, for the most part, they're aimed generally at an idea of good luck, warding off bad luck, not feeling too anxious because you have something might help you. And this is why we can relate these objects, I think, quite easily to lucky objects that people have today. Do you have a lucky charm?
I've got like jewellery and things like that people have given me, but I don't wear them every day. So no lucky charms.
Okay. And if you have something that is special to you and that was given to you by someone who is special to you, and if you were able to replace it with an identical piece of jewellery...
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't exchange it?
No. I don't know whether I would extend that to then say that object was lucky.
But it's a personal emotional connection with an inanimate object. And we find it very difficult not to do that as humans.
So magical thinking, I guess, is something that pervades a lot of our thinking, even though we might not think.
Yes. Our next question is, do little rituals make you feel less anxious? We have probably an unpleasant ritual object as our example, which is a toad pierced with thorns.
It doesn't really look much like a toad anymore, does it?
No, it's very dried up.
This is like an 19th century stress ball.
A lot of rituals, most of which we would call magic rituals, I think, but not all of them, have to do with protection and anxiety about harm. This is a question that I think will apply to a lot of people, and we could, if we expand it, we could include people wearing lucky shoes when they're about to go onto a football field. Psychosomatically, if it makes you feel less anxious, this may be a positive thing for you anyway. I mean, you might perform better on the football field or in the exam or the interview if you feel like you've got something that brings you good luck. This is the question that gets me. So what we have here is a wax figure of a man with pins in various parts of the body.
This faceless wax figure was collected in Malaysia in 1896 and looks every bit as disturbing as it sounds. But brace yourself, listener, as things are about to get even darker.
The making of a figure and then defacing it with sharp things is very common in rituals to harm someone. This is where I think most magically, and the question is, could you stab the image of a loved one? Rationally, I know, we all know, it's a flat two-dimensional image. It actually doesn't bear any real relationship to the living, breathing person.
This is the one question I think where it's really stumped me. I mean, I came in here thinking, I'm a rational, I'm a man of science, I've got a science degree, I know that there are these, none of this stuff has a real bearing on the real physical world, but actually, I don't think I could bring myself to do that either.
Anand, I asked you to send me some photos yesterday.
You did?
Yeah, so I'm being quite mean. I actually printed a couple of them out. We've got a picture of... It's your mum and your brother, isn't it? I think I've got a pair of scissors in the bag as well.
You've brought a pair of scissors with you?
Yeah, I just wondered, just to see. How comfortable would you feel?
I honestly can't do it. I think it's similar to wishing ill on somebody. You're not going to be able to actually change their lives or bring them something about just by thinking about it. But would you want to? It's so easy for me to just not do that. I'd rather just not do that.
You don't have to.
Okay, thank you.
The thing about it is, it's very common in ritual magic because it's a visceral, emotional thing to do, and when you do an act of magic, you're at least psychologically changing something in yourself through the emotion of doing it.
Thanks to Sophie Page, and no thanks to my evilly inclined producer Mel for that mean trick. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of you wouldn't be too keen on stabbing dolls or cutting pictures of your loved ones either, but I was a bit surprised by how strong my aversion was. Even though I knew rationally that nothing would actually come of it, I just couldn't bring myself to cut up the picture. So what's going on here? How can something that we know isn't true still have an impact on the way we behave? Enter Jane Risen, Professor of Behavioural Science at Chicago University's Booth School of Business, and an expert in magical thinking.
So my research shows that everybody has these beliefs to some extent. What will vary is the extent to which you sort of explicitly endorse them. And you'll certainly see variance over how much people will behave according to these different beliefs. But you see it across cultures. You see it for people who are educated and non-educated. My way of thinking about this is that a lot of these superstitious intuitions and beliefs are really just a product of how our minds work. And so this is just how people think about the world. And we're not perfect when we try to think about the world.
So where do these superstitious or intuitive kind of beliefs come from? Do you think that we have them for some kind of evolutionary reason?
I think that they are building on psychological processes, and those are functional and they exist for a reason. I don't necessarily believe that the superstitious beliefs are here for a reason. So, for example, we're always searching to understand what's going on in our world and trying to predict what's going to happen. We are creatures who are thinking in causal ways. And our search means that sometimes we see things as causal when they're not. So even when things are random, even when things are correlated, we see them as actually being causally related. That ends up leading to superstitious beliefs. That is especially powerful in moments when you're experiencing uncertainty and tension and stress. And so in those moments, you're going to be desperate for anything that you can do to potentially control a scary environment.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Another example is the way that heuristics, or sort of the rules of thumb that our mind will rely on. So it's a rule of thumb that we use that when something comes to mind easily, we use that to determine how likely or common it is. So lots of times things that are recent or emotional or vivid come to mind very easily, and so we think of those things as being more common and more likely than they are.
Yeah. So I don't really necessarily believe in tempting fate that much, but we went to a museum for this program, and there was a bit in the museum about voodoo, and my producer Mel very cruelly brought along some pictures of some loved ones, and I was asked if I would cut them up. I just actually couldn't bring myself to do it. I was just associating it with the bad outcome of anything bad happening to them.
What you're describing now is building on a different heuristic, which is known as either representativeness or sometimes called similarity, which is just, it's because of the likeness. If you just drew a smiley face and said, could you cut this? That doesn't seem so problematic. It's that it's the actual representation of your loved one. It's so easy to imagine a causal connection between two things that look so much alike. And that is part of where the voodoo belief comes from. It's, again, building on basic building blocks of the way our minds work. Similarity is a very useful tool, but it's a good example of how we can end up with a magical belief that doesn't actually get supported by any scientific evidence. I'm sort of asking the question, why do ordinary people have these beliefs even in pretty ordinary circumstances, right? They seem to show up in lots of places, lots of the time. And so that's why I've been very interested in seeing how a very basic kind of dual process model can be used to understand superstition too, which is the idea that there are two sort of sets of mental systems in our mind. One that operates very quickly and automatically and doesn't require any cognitive resources or sort of working memory load, and another that is slow and deliberate and does require our sort of attention and deliberate working memory. And the fast process can kind of give rise to an intuition, and the slower process can then come in and determine whether or not it makes sense and correct the error. And what I suggest in my work is that when it comes to superstitions and magical thinking, that's not always the case. Sometimes that slow system recognizes the error, it recognizes that the intuition is wrong, and then maintains it anyway.
To illustrate how these two mental systems might interact, we're going to do a thought experiment. I want you to imagine this. I have 3 envelopes on the table, and one of them, you don't know which, has some money inside that you can win. I want you to pick one of the envelopes, 1, 2, or 3. Chosen? Okay, good. Now, you can keep your envelope, Or you can swap it for the remaining 2 envelopes. What do you go for? Well, from a rational point of view, the choice is clear, as Jane explains.
You should go for the 2. There's no question here rationally what you should do. But a lot of people have the feeling, well, I chose that first one. What we find is that it's not that people think that their envelope is more likely to win, generally speaking, but where this tempting fate belief comes is that people believe that if they were to trade it, then it would become more likely to win.
Ah, okay.
This is where the magic comes. And so they're torn between an intuition where they shouldn't trade their envelope and the rational knowledge that they should. We find that a large minority of them, it's around like 40% of them, will stick with one envelope.
Wow, that does seem like a really high number. And so what you're saying there is that kind of choice there between the intuition and then the rational kind of oversight, they kind of represent these 2 different systems in our brain. And sometimes the rational system will win out, but other times we kind of, I guess, give in to the first intuition system just because of some kind of irrational belief.
That's right. And that's what we refer to as acquiescence, when they follow that intuitive belief even while recognizing that it's not the rational thing to do. What we do know is that the more powerful the intuition is, the more likely you are to follow it. So another thing to consider is the costs of ignoring your rational side or ignoring your intuition.
So might that idea of the costs explain my experience with the voodoo? So, the cost of ignoring my rational system is very small. I mean, maybe I sound like a slightly irrational person on the radio, but the cost of ignoring the intuition that actually this is going to be really bad if I cut through a picture of a loved one, that's a bigger cost, so I'd rather avoid that and not do it.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect illustration. The only thing that I would add to that description there is to just say that the reason you are having an emotional reaction in the first place is because there is some sort of superstitious intuition underlying it. I mean that even just to the extent that you're entertaining it as a possibility.
When might belief in superstitions be helpful to us, and when might it start to become harmful to us?
They help protect certain, values that communities have. The idea not to be overconfident and to be prepared, not to take unnecessary risks. So some superstitions, I think, help you manage the kinds of behaviors that could really lead to negative consequences, and they're just kind of overextended into these magical places. On the other side, mostly I think about these that if they're taken too far, they can sort of interfere with your life. And so you can think of rituals that easily blend into things like OCD. If they're interfering in you being able to live your life or they're interfering in other people being able to productively engage in their lives, then those are both times that you want to be thoughtful.
Wise words from Jane Risen there. You are listening to Crowdscience on the BBC World Service, the programme that answers your questions about life, Earth and the universe. If you have a question for a future programme, you can send it to crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. And we'd also love to hear from you about the superstitions where you come from, so please do send them in. We've heard from Jane about how our natural tendency as human beings to seek causal connections can help us to understand our world, but can sometimes lead to irrational or false beliefs. Is that what's happening with listener Marcel? Perhaps he's making a connection between what somebody says and an unconnected bad outcome. Because, well, what are the chances of both things happening so close together? It can't just be a coincidence, can it? To help us answer that question is David Spiegelhalter, an expert on coincidences. David is the Winton Professor for the Understanding of Risk at the University of Cambridge, where he spoke to us from his lab. Do you believe then in good or bad luck?
No. Except as a label which is applied after things have happened in order to describe things that happened without any apparent cause.
So we have a listener, Marcel, who was asking us a question about the evil eye. He gave an example that, somebody might say something nice about his car, and then, almost the next day or the next week, something bad happens to his car gets scratched or something. What might explain then why that happens and why it just seems that sometimes you have that link between someone saying something and then something bad happening almost immediately afterwards?
So I don't believe it at all. I do believe, of course, that if somebody mentions something, then you're more attentive to that. I actually think that if you have that sort of belief, you will notice good things more and you'll notice bad things more. That's what I always say about coincidences. In fact, they're largely in the eye of the beholder because people create their own coincidences. People who are observant about what's around them, people who talk to other people, people who just engage with their surroundings are bound to notice far more things than people like me who never talk to anyone and go around staring at the pavement.
I think we've got something in common there, David. So what you're saying then is that there are kind of potential coincidences kind of floating around our environment all the time, but it's just a case of whether you act in a way that kind of brings them out and makes them real. And then you might be sitting next to somebody on the train and say, oh, gosh, well, we went to the same school or we have the same birthday. But, you have to be an active sort of participant in that.
Exactly. Because the amazing thing about coincidences is not how many there are, it's how few there are. Because there must be vast numbers of latent coincidences around us all the time. Every day we must walk past people who have a connection to us. Like an iceberg, every so often one of these latent coincidences pops up and becomes manifest.
If we could walk around seeing all the potential coincidences that surround us every day, we'd probably think they're much less remarkable than they are. But as it is, we only become aware of a tiny fraction of them, and as a result they often make a big impression on us. As we've heard, the evil eye is really about bad things befalling you when things seem to be going very well. You've just bought the car of your dreams or had a beautiful baby girl. So I put it to David, statistically, are things just more likely to go badly if you've had a run of apparent good luck?
Exactly. Known as regression to the mean. It basically means that, runs of good luck or bad luck don't last. The classic one is the curse of Sports Illustrated, the sports people who appeared on the cover of this magazine frequently in the subsequent months broke legs, had terrible failures. And it's not a curse, it's regression to the mean. It's the fact that if something is highlighted because it's done extremely well, then things are going to change. They're not going to keep that up.
Is there any way we can measure luck or luckiness scientifically?
Micromort is a measure of the risk of death, and it's a 1 in a million chance of dying when carrying out a particular activity.
Oh, wait, so 1 micromort is 1 millionth chance of death?
1 millionth chance of death.
So it's an actual unit.
Unit of unluckiness.
Wow.
And it's very useful because it brings small numbers into nice whole numbers. So we can say that, a parachute jump, roughly 7 in a million parachute jumps end up with the death of the jumper. So it's 7 micromorts on average to do a parachute jump. And then we can start comparing, riding a motorbike. You only get about 6-7 miles on a micromort. So about 50 miles on a motorbike is about the same as a parachute jump.
Our producer Mel is wincing. I think she rides a motorbike.
Yeah, well, sure, there's safer and more dangerous ways of riding a motorbike. These are all averages, of course. They vary between participants, but they give a real feeling for the actual risk involved in an activity. When I talk about this to school kids, I'll say, it's good to take risks. No, get out there, good, take chances. Not necessarily life-threatening risks, but risks in terms of social risks, of trying new things, of trying new friends, of wearing different things. And it may not do very well. You may fail, but you'll have learned something. Because if you don't take risks, you never learn anything at all. You live your life entirely in caution and safety. But of course, that doesn't mean being reckless. There's the crucial difference, which is basically not thinking about the risks. If you're reckless and something bad happens to you, you can't say afterwards, well, that was bad luck. No, it's because you were stupid. But that's a really big difference between if you take some risk and something not so good happens. You can say, well, that's, maybe that was bad. It didn't work out well that time. Maybe I was unlucky, but I have learned something. So I think risk taking is just super. Just be careful there.
So maybe part of what Marcel is experiencing is regression to the mean. A pristine car is going to get scratched eventually, and there might have been lots of times where people complimented it and nothing bad happened at all. But when those two things happen together, we feel like something mysterious might be going on. I guess you could avoid the problem entirely by never taking your car out of the garage, but as David points out, that would be to miss the point somewhat. Maybe one way to think of bad luck is as a potential consequence of taking risks, which you kind of need to do in order to live a full life. For David, luck is a way of describing things that have already happened. But for lots of other people, luck is a kind of force that can influence their lives. Let's pop outside the studio for a moment and ask people on the streets of London how they feel about luck.
I'm an actor, so I feel like a lot of it's down to luck.
I believe more in fate. What will be, will be. What will happen, will happen. If it happens, it happens.
Do either of you believe in luck?
Try not to, but I do.
Yeah?
It's stupid, but it doesn't mean I haven't got rid of it. Don't walk under ladders, for goodness sake.
No.
Black cats I'm not too bothered about. Magpies, what I do is I salute them. Since I don't know the sex, I always say, good morning, Mr. Magpie or Mrs. Magpie.
Best to cover
because
all
that
bases.
apparently, undoes the bad luck.
Yeah.
Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
I'm not particularly superstitious.
We grew up in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean, they have myths. When you have all these myths, it's at the back of your head. There is one about if you're walking down the street and the black cat crosses your path, you're going to have bad luck. So if we see a black cat, we turn around, we go the other way.
I believe in creating your own luck.
So quite a broad range of opinions on luck there. But what can science tell us about them? Richard Wiseman, former magician and now Professor of Psychology at the University of Hertfordshire, has spent a lot of time studying the beliefs and behaviours of lucky and unlucky people.
From our research, around about 12% of the population think they're extremely lucky and about 8% think they're extremely unlucky, and most of us sit somewhere in between. But we do have a thought, when you ask people in their minds, how lucky or unlucky we are, and it starts young. You can go into schools, young children, they'll be able to identify the lucky and unlucky kids in the classroom. So this is something which is something to do with our psychology. It's in our psyche, this notion, even though it's irrational, of being lucky and unlucky.
So is the idea of luck tied to something that we've been talking about in this programme, this idea of magical thinking, the idea that you can say or do things that will influence the world or your life in ways that can't really or kind of exist outside of scientific or rational ways of thinking?
Well, it's an interesting question. So I think that considering yourself lucky or unlucky is a form of magical thinking, because clearly crossing your fingers or whatever it is probably doesn't influence the world directly. However, what my research shows is that it does affect your mentality, your psychology, your beliefs, your attitudes, and they then have an impact on your life. So lucky people are more successful than unlucky people. They do go to parties, chat with people and end up getting job offers. They do find more parking spaces. They do better in life because they're far more positive and that optimism drives them forward. So in a weird way, it's rational to be irrational.
Right, okay, so there is kind of such a thing as lucky and unlucky people because lucky and unlucky people behave in different ways and will therefore influence their own lives in different ways. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my research spent a decade looking at extremely lucky and unlucky people, about 1,000 of them, and we could see the lucky people were far healthier. They tend to have more long-lasting relationships. They tend to earn more money. They tend to do better in life. So in that sense, yes, they're luckier, and our research showed that they were doing things, often unconsciously, to create that good luck, the way they're thinking, the way they're behaving. So yes, there is a psychology, there is a science to luck.
That's amazing. So what kinds of principles were these lucky or unlucky people living their lives based on? What kinds of things were they doing differently to each other?
One of the key principles is that they're more open to opportunities. And so they tend to have a goal, as we all do, in terms of being happy and healthy and whatever, but how they were going to get there, well, they're very open to different routes through. So if they met somebody at a party and actually they think, well, that's an interesting person, I'll keep in touch with that person, they'll go along that route. Where unlucky people are often stuck in a rut. They've got one way in which they intend to be successful in relationships or health or whatever it is, and they stick with that no matter what happens. So that kind of flexibility, behavioural flexibility, is very important.
Are there some experiments that you have done that have kind of shown what the differences are between those people who identify in those ways?
So we've carried out quite a lot of task-based experiments. So, for example, we might have them flick through a newspaper, and there might be opportunities in that newspaper, like big adverts saying, tell the experimenter you've seen this and win £100. And the lucky people tend to have quite a large, what's called attentional spotlight. They're very relaxed, and so they literally see more of the world, will spot those opportunities and go, wow, do I get my money? I'm going to give them the money because they're not that lucky, but still. The unlucky people, very anxious about themselves, very small spotlight, literally don't see those opportunities. Lucky people are also optimists. They think that life will work out well for them. And so because of that, they're very resilient. When bad things happen, they will bounce back because they have this underlying belief that in the future, good things will come about. Unlucky people, exactly the opposite, the pessimistic. For example, if you give people a scenario, such as you walk into a bank and in bursts a robber, they fire a gun, and the bullet hits you in the arm, are you lucky or unlucky? You see massive differences in which people respond to that. I think it's resilience. The lucky people going, oh my goodness, what a lucky day. Could have been my heart, could have been my head, just my arm. If I need some time off work, this could be a great lucky break. The unlucky people go, why are you even asking the question? I've just been shot in the arm. This is clearly an unlucky episode. So those very simple experiments often yield quite profound insight into people's different mindsets.
So in some ways, we've kind of come full circle. At the beginning of this programme, we heard how magical beliefs are sometimes the result of our brains making false connections and getting things wrong. But Richard's research seemed to show that believing you're lucky can become self-fulfilling and actually make you more lucky. To that end, we asked him to share his tips on how to improve your luck.
So one of the simplest things is keeping what's called a luck diary, as many of the lucky people did, which is at the end of each day they would note down one positive thing that happened that day, or they'd note down a sense of gratitude for their friends or their health or family or whatever it is. Because often we get used to those things, they vanish from our lives. Focusing on them means that you kind of keep that resilience and optimism going. Also, being behaviourally flexible. So taking different routes to work or college, watching different sorts of television programmes or listening to certain different types of radio or going to certain types of restaurants and so on. Things you haven't tried before is a very good idea. And also practicing resilience when bad things happen, rather than thinking, well, actually, it could have been better, thinking, well, it could have been worse, which is the natural sort of thinking style of the lucky person.
Okay, right. So a lucky person might think, well, actually, at least this didn't happen, or what have I learned from this experience? Whereas an unlucky person would be, this is just the worst thing that's happened to anyone ever.
That's right, and have a fatalistic mindset that no matter what they do, they can't influence the future. It's one of the reasons why I talk about thinking yourself as unlucky as one of the most one of the worst beliefs you can hold about yourself, because you're convinced in pretty much every domain there is nothing you can do to improve upon life, and so you become very, very fatalistic.
Sound advice from Richard Wiseman there. That brings us to the end of this programme. And while I would still stick to my initial convictions that I'm not superstitious, I can't escape the fact that, like many people, I do have superstitious intuitions on some level, even when I don't want them because I know they're irrational. But it seems that's just how our brains work, and for good reason. And while I don't really believe in luck either, after hearing Richard's advice, maybe I will try to adopt the mindset of the lucky person. Stop staring at the pavement and be a bit more open to opportunity. Why not chat to that person in the elevator, or look on the positive side a bit more? You never know. Over to Marcel to sign off for this week.
That's it for this edition of Crowdscience on the BBC World Service, which was presented by Anand Yagatia and produced by Melanie Brown. Today's question came from me, Marcel, an Albanian American in Boston, USA. If you've got a question you'd like Crowdscience to explore, then please email it to crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for listening, goodbye, and good luck.
Thanks for listening to this podcast of Crowdscience. We love opening our inbox to your weird and wonderful questions, and so curious are your minds that we're planning a sister programme that's going to be all about family. So please do send us any questions on that theme to the Crowdscience email address, crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thanks. Bye.